Westpac scandal. Now, here is a bank that was so woke that it held a fabulous lunch to promote the fight against human trafficking. Unfortunately, at that very same time, this bank was doing flat nothing about another kind of trafficking, about official warnings that it was being used by pedophiles to send money overseas. And because of that, and for failing to properly check 23 million transactions to see if they were being used to, finance terrorism, things like that, the bank now faces a record fine, tipped to be over $1 billion, and its chief executive officer out the door. Joining me for Culture Wars is, as always, Rowan Dean, author, editor of Spectator Australia and presenter of the absolutely fantastic Outsiders of Sunday Morning. And I must say, last Sunday's was probably one of your very, very best, Rowan. I really loved it.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you.
How woke was Westpac? Did Johannes Leek nail it to his cartoon in the Australian newspaper today, the Wokepack board playing with gender politics and queer politics and race politics and green politics?
That's right.
While their business goes down the toilet.
Absolutely, Andrew, and terrific cartoon there by Johannes, and Johannes also obviously on Chris Kenny every Monday night. Great stuff, and great to see one of Bill Leak's little characters tucked into the background there as well, like father, like son. Great sense of humour. Absolutely spot on. What is happening here? Andrew, I call it the wokemare. We're living through a wokemare, which is, in a nightmare you get that dreadful thing, your legs can't move and you can't get out of this thing. And that's what this whole woke culture is all about. It doesn't make sense. It's illogical like a nightmare, but you just can't escape it. It is everywhere. You can't run away from it. So what we saw with Westpac, that's a classic example you've got there, where they had the big special lunch, all the lovies were there. I noted Michael Photius was there, and Tara Moss was there, and they're all there a couple of years ago, and they're all being lectured about how Westpac is so concerned about human trafficking and one of these great issues of the day. Of course, a great example of how maybe they should have just been perhaps more focusing their own attention on their own bank accounts rather than worrying about these big woke issues. And obviously the allegations are that 23 million transactions were dodgy, and the allegations are that some of them were fueling pedophilic rings in the Philippines and elsewhere. But what happens here, Andrew, what we've got to be really clear about is that all companies, particularly private companies, but all companies need to have their priorities. And it's the priorities companies, the bigger the company it is, it works on a kind of pyramid structure, and whatever the priorities are of that company, it will work its way down through layers of management. And if your priorities are, like Westpac's have been so clearly over the last few years, all the woke agendas, climate change. I actually had a look at their climate change policy this evening, Andrew. Westpac's #1 priority is to transition out of coal and into renewables. You were just talking to the great Craig Kelly about Malcolm Turnbull claiming that renewables have won when they clearly haven't. Renewables have lost. But Westpac have named this getting out of coal as their #1 priority, Andrew. That means basically their #1 priority, according to this bank, is to have Australians have higher electricity bills and be less prosperous. That is their #1 priority. So if you as a company are prioritising climate change, gender, I mean, let's forget about that for the moment, we'll talk about that in a sec, things like human trafficking, you are not concentrating on your core business because it filters down through the echelon. So what happens is one manager thinks, oh, I've got to impress the person above me, so rather than focusing on this, I'm going to focus on climate change today to impress my boss. And then the people underneath him see, oh, we've got to be focusing on climate change because that's what's working its way up through the ranks, and those people get promoted and do well. So it infuses the entire company, and they lose sight of what their core goal should be. And we're seeing this in company after company after company, and they're all running into all sorts of strife because they're not focusing on what their core business should be.
Never mind saving the planet, how about saving the business? That would have been exactly #1 item, I would have thought. But Rowan, I've got to match yours with mine, Goldman Sachs, big investment bank, it has actually outwoked even Westpac. It's gone hyper-gender aware. It's asked its staff to share their preferred pronouns. And it's given the following example. Hi, I'm Karen. My pronouns are she and hers. Welcome to the team. Rowan, by the way, my pronouns are his and mate. Is this particularly necessary?
No, it's insanity. It is absolute insanity. Yes, there are two very simple phrases which I think people should keep in mind in any company. That is, you should be choosing people to work with, for employing people based on their merit, their skill set, and ignore anything to do with their gender, their race, their religion. Ignore all that. Focus on their skill set and their merits. Bang. That's number one. The second thing is, if you have people who are transsexual or transgender, treat them with respect and politely. Full stop.
Correct.
End of conversation. You do not need seminars. Goldman Sachs had a whole seminar where they had some transgender woman, guy up there talking to different people coming up and saying, well, I'm Karen and I'm this and I'm that. It's irrelevant, Andrew, and it goes back to not focusing on your core business, because an hour spent with a whole team of people sitting around in some big seminar discussing this stuff, they are not focusing on what you would hope if you invested in that company they are focusing on, which is making you more money out of your profits. But instead they're wallowing in, I said this woke mare of identity and transgender politics. It's an excuse to not be focusing on the seriously important things, and it's a massive distraction. And you will see time and time again that these companies that focus on this, there's that great saying, go woke, go broke, but it is also, and that's been happening company after company, product after product, advertising campaign after advertising campaign has failed and gone broke because they've concentrated on trying to be woke.
Oh, we've seen Gillette go into trouble that way. Correct.
Yeah,
but you know what really upsets me? When you get something like this saying, we want you all to say, introduce yourself, say your pronouns, obviously for 99.99%, if not 100% of their team, that is actually strictly not necessary. You don't need to tell me, Rowan, what your pronouns are. I kind of intuit it, really. You know, call me stupid, but I've managed to do this, and I suspect most people do too. What it really is saying, we want you to parade your wokeness. It's not about the object of your wokeness, it's about you. You are on trial. And I think it's such an insulting way to treat people, of having to say things that don't need saying simply to demonstrate some sort of supersensitivity. I think it's arrogant.
Exactly. It's extraordinary, and it's very damaging to companies to pursue this line, because what is happening is that they are not being successful in the areas people want them to be successful in. Therefore, shareholders lose out, consumers lose out, and ultimately these companies are doing a huge disservice to the people who work in those companies.
Well, they're humiliating they're humiliating their
treating
staff.
them like children, and ultimately they are going broke. They are going down the pan because they're not concentrating on their core business.
Who knows?